Hey everyone, and welcome. Get ready, because today we're diving deep into something super relatable: relationships.
That's right. But not just the surface stuff, we're going deeper and exploring the fascinating world of attachment theory.
Attachment theory. So, are we talking about those little strings that keep us tethered to our phones?
Well, not quite, though it can sometimes feel that way. Attachment theory basically explores how the relationships we had in our early childhood shape the way we connect with others as adults, especially in romantic relationships.
Okay, so those patterns we keep repeating even if they're driving us nuts.
You got it. And the thing is, most people aren't even aware these patterns exist. They just keep bumping into the same relationship roadblocks over and over.
So that's where our deep dive comes in. We're handing out the maps to navigate this whole attachment thing.
Exactly. We're breaking down the 4 main attachment styles: secure, anxious preoccupied, dismissive avoidant, and fearful avoidant. By the end, you'll have a much clearer understanding of your own relationship tendencies and those of, well, everyone in your life.
Okay, sounds good to me. So, let's start with the basics. What does a securely attached person even look like in a relationship?
Well, picture this. Someone who's comfortable with intimacy. They trust their partner. They don't freak out when there's a disagreement, and they can be vulnerable without feeling totally exposed.
They sound like unicorns. Do those people actually exist?
They do, and it's not magic. It's usually because they had a pretty secure upbringing. Their caregivers were consistently loving and responsive, so they learned that relationships can be a safe space, a source of comfort, not stress.
So they grew up with good relationship role models, basically.
Exactly. But remember, even though they might make it look easy, it doesn't mean they're perfect, right? Every attachment style has its strengths and weaknesses.
So what could possibly be a downside to being securely attached? That almost sounds like, well, a bad thing.
Well, sometimes their own relationship ease can make it a little harder for them to understand the struggles of, let's say, someone who's a bit more, shall we say, high maintenance.
So they might not be the best at handling relationship drama.
It's not that they can't handle it, it's more that they might not fully grasp why it's such a big deal for their partner. They might even get a little impatient if their partner needs constant reassurance or if they have a hard time opening up.
Okay, so patience isn't their strongest suit. I can see that. Yeah. But overall, it sounds like having a secure attachment style is a pretty good deal in the relationship department.
Oh, absolutely. They tend to have the smoothest ride. But now, let's switch gears and talk about the folks who are always hitting refresh on their inboxes, anxiously awaiting a reply. Let's dive into the wonderful world of the anxious preoccupied attachment style.
Anxious preoccupied. Yeah, okay. I think that's where I fall on the spectrum. That feeling of constantly needing reassurance, always low-key worried about being abandoned or I'm not good enough. It's exhausting.
I hear you. And believe it or not, it's actually a very common attachment style. And it often stems from, you guessed it, childhood.
So my parents are to blame for my relationship woes. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily blame, but our early experiences definitely shape our attachment patterns. So let's say you had a caregiver who wasn't always emotionally available. Maybe they were a bit inconsistent with their affection or attention.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Your little brain might have started to connect love with uncertainty. Okay, sometimes I get love and attention, sometimes I don't, and I have no control over it.
So then you grow up thinking, oh, I better cling on tight to this relationship because who knows how long it'll last.
It's kind of like that, yeah. And that pattern, that fear of abandonment, it can really show up in adult relationships. Imagine it like this. You're a phone, but your battery life is, well, terrible.
Okay, that tracks. Always scrambling for a charger.
Exactly. And in this case, the charger is your partner's reassurance, their affection, their validation. You need that constant boost to feel secure.
Okay, but on the plus side, I've heard people with this style are the most loving and devoted partners.
Absolutely. They really value connection. They're all in, emotionally invested, and they tend to be incredibly empathetic partners.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? That intensity, it can sometimes backfire. Because they crave closeness and validation so much, they might become a little, how do I put this delicately, needy.
Yeah, needy is one word for it.
And that neediness can manifest in different ways. Maybe they struggle to communicate their needs directly because they're terrified of pushing their partner away. Or, on the flip side, they might become overly demanding of their partner's time and attention.
So that whole, I need to know your every move kind of thing.
Yeah, sometimes it can go a bit too far. And then, of course, you have the jealousy, the possessiveness, maybe even trying to control their partner's behavior.
Yikes, it's like a recipe for relationship disaster.
It can be tricky, for sure, because often It creates this push and pull dynamic. The anxious, preoccupied partner is clinging tighter, craving reassurance, while the other partner starts to feel suffocated and pulls away, which just reinforces those initial fears of abandonment. It's a tough cycle to break.
Okay, so we've covered the folks who are securely attached, the ones who are anxiously attached. Who's next on our attachment safari?
Well, let's swing over to the other side of the spectrum and meet the masters of emotional distancing, the dismissive avoidant types.
Dismissive avoidant. Okay, yeah. These are the folks who make me feel like I'm coming on way too strong. They're like the opposite of needy, almost like they're allergic to commitment.
It can definitely seem that way, but it's usually more complex than just not wanting to be tied down. Remember how we talked about those early childhood experiences shaping our attachment style?
Right, so like those first relationships set the stage for how we view connection later on.
Exactly. So with dismissive avoidant folks, it's often the case that their early caregivers were emotionally unavailable or discouraged vulnerability.
So instead of learning to reach out for comfort or support, they kind of shut down emotionally.
Exactly. They learn to equate vulnerability with weakness and independence with safety.
So they basically become their own emotional islands, self-sufficient, but also, well, kind of lonely.
It can be a double-edged sword, that's for sure. And just like with the other styles, it plays out in predictable ways in their relationships.
So are they capable of real intimacy? Or is it all just surface level stuff?
They're definitely capable of intimacy, but it's a process and it takes a lot of patience and understanding. Because that need for independence, it often translates into a fear of getting too close.
So the closer you get, the more they pull away.
It's like a reflex for them. They might crave connection on some level, but the moment it starts to feel real, those old fears of engulfment and vulnerability get triggered.
Okay, so I've got those who crave closeness but are also scared of it, and then we have those who avoid it at all costs. Where does that leave everyone else? Is there like a hybrid attachment style?
You're reading my mind. There's one more style we need to talk about, and it's kind of a mix of the two we just discussed. It's called fearful avoidant, sometimes referred to as disorganized attachment.
Fearful avoidant. So they're afraid, but they also avoid. That sounds, well, complicated.
It definitely can be. Imagine craving intimacy, genuinely wanting that close bond, but at the same time being absolutely terrified of it.
Talk about mixed signals. What's going on in their brain?
Well, it's like they're having an inner battle. One part of them longs for connection, remembers how good it felt to be close to someone, but then another part, often fueled by past hurts or rejections, slams on the brakes.
So they're basically stuck in this push and pull pattern, wanting closeness, but then pushing it away when it gets too real.
You got it. And it can be incredibly frustrating, both for them and for their partners. They might sabotage relationships before they even really begin, or send mixed messages that leave their partner feeling confused and insecure.
Okay, so with all these different attachment styles floating around out there, is it even possible to have a healthy, happy relationship if you and your partner don't perfectly match?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the good news is, it is possible. But it takes effort, self-awareness, and a willingness to understand both your own attachment needs and those of your partner.
So it's less about finding someone with the perfect attachment style and more about learning to navigate those differences.
Exactly. It's like learning to dance with someone who has a different rhythm than you. It might feel a little awkward at first, but with practice and communication, you can find a flow that works for both of you.
I love that analogy. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into attachment theory, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I'd say the most important thing is to approach this whole attachment thing with a sense of curiosity and self-compassion. It's not about labeling yourself or blaming your parents or feeling broken.
It's about understanding those patterns, right? Like, why do I react this way in relationships? What's the root of that?
Exactly. And once you have that awareness, you can start to make more conscious choices in your relationships. You can communicate your needs more effectively, set healthier boundaries, and break free from those old, unhelpful patterns.
Love it. Knowledge is power, or at least relationship power in this case. So, to all our listeners out there, go forth and create those secure, loving connections you deserve, armed with your newfound attachment wisdom.